Hey guys, and welcome back to the show. I am your host, Megan Hardy, and today I am joined by a very special guest, Bryce Hamilton. Bryce is the founder of Hamilton Fit, and he specializes in simplifying fat loss through realistic, science backed strategies. And today we're going to have a kind of two-part conversation around setting up your environment for fat loss. So, kind of more practical advice for you guys. And we're going to talk about grace versus perfectionism. So, more on like the mindset side of things, and something I know a lot of you probably struggle with. So, Bryce, I am so glad to have you here and welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much for having me, and I'm glad to be here.
Yes, absolutely. Well, before we jump into the topics, if you would just share with everyone a little bit about yourself and like your personal journey as a coach and getting into the health and fitness space, and just like tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, 100%. So, my journey to the health and fitness space is probably what a lot of people who are in the health and fitness space where it began, which is insecurities that we all had, and trying to find a way to solve those insecurities. But the way that I kind of went about it was probably not the most ideal route. And I am glad that I figured out a much better way as time went on. But when I was a kid, I remember, liking sports, doing all the things, soccer, basketball, baseball. But kind of the problem for me was that my brother, no matter what sport we played, was always just a little bit better than me.
Yeah.
So yeah, super
Older
frustrating.
brother? Older?
Older brother, yeah.
Okay.
So kind of what developed in my mind, the obstacle that set up for me was that over time, people would, notice that and they would say things like, oh, Bryce, he's okay, but he's got the shallow end of the gene pool, that kind of thing. And
Uh,
so, as a kid, that should not have bothered me at all. But at the same time, you're a kid and you don't have the maturity to like think through those things. So what my response to that was, okay, I'm going to get really good at other things that he's not good at. And so I became really skilled at communication and I really did a lot of things that were geared towards communication and academics, which I really did excel at. But the downside to that is that I purposefully neglected everything physical. And so
mm,
because of that, I kind of perpetuated what everyone thought in the first place is that as time went on, I continued to get more and more out of shape. And I think I noticed it for the first time when I was a sophomore in college. So this was probably like around 2010. And around a sophomore in college, I looked in the mirror one day and was like, that is not good. That's basically all I remember thinking. And so I started trying to fix that. But the way that I went about fixing it was, okay, I'm going to restrict calories and I'm going to run 3 miles every single day. And so that's what I did. Now, any ultra marathoners that are running are laughing right now and saying, I run 30 miles a day. But for me, as an out
Yeah.
of shape, like sophomore in college who had neglected my physical condition for years and years, 3 miles was a big ask. That was a big commitment. And so I
Yeah.
did it. And I did end up losing weight, but at the same time, I still remember looking in the mirror and thinking, like, what did I do that for? Like the scale number is going down, but the shape isn't changing. And it
Mm,
wasn't until my younger brother, who is 7 years younger than me, came up to me one day and he was like, hey, I want to join a gym because he really wanted to impress this girl in his class at the time because he was still in high school. And my thinking around that was, this running thing's not working out for me. So I might as well do this other thing. And we joined this local gym and we met a guy there named Rick. And Rick kind of became our fitness father figure. And
wow.
he taught us all the right ways to do things. Hey, you need to focus on strength. Don't worry about losing weight all the time. Just focus on maintenance until you build muscle tone. Or I say muscle tone because I'm used to communicating, but really just build muscle mass, right? Build
Yeah.
muscle so that you can have more metabolic flexibility so that you don't have to worry about, losing weight all the time, but that you can actually be functional. And so I did that for a year. I was like, you know what? I'm going to follow this guy's advice for a full year. And I remember after that year, that was the light bulb moment for me because after that year, I lost a total of 0 pounds, but I went from a 36-inch pant size to a 31-inch pant size. And I was
Nice.
like, it was wild to me that I looked in the mirror and I looked like I was in shape, which had never happened before. And it was not
And
achieved through calorie restriction. It was not achieved through excess cardio. It was totally achieved through just eating at maintenance and training progressive overload over a long period of time. And that was literally it. And that basically changed my entire mindset about fitness. Got my first fitness certification back in by the time I went through all that, it was probably around 2013 and have been in the fitness space since then. So, definitely not the most ideal route to the fitness space, but probably honestly a common one as
yep.
well.
Super common. And also just like I always think too, because I have my own past of binging, restricting that stuff and not ideal, but I'm like also very we can relate in a way that we wouldn't be able to if we didn't have those bad experiences as well.
Oh, yeah,
You know,
100%.
I'm like,
Nothing is more
we know.
demoralizing than working with somebody who's like, I've never been where you are. And you're like,
Oh
oh,
shoot. Yeah. You're like, oh, okay, never mind. But hey, father figure Rick was onto something in the gym.
oh,
He had
100%. Yeah,
great
he was the man.
advice. Did you find it hard, like when he was like, don't focus on the scale or like losing weight, just like do this for this, when you kind of committed to that year of doing what father figure Rick said, like, did you find that hard mentally at all? Or were you just like so invested in the process at that point?
At the beginning I did because I think that everyone has that fear
Yeah.
of what if I don't focus on losing weight and nothing happens, nothing changes. As a matter of fact, the first probably 3 months is probably, I think for everybody, I think the first 3 months is the period of time that you kind of have to go through to see things start to change in a positive way. And then you become bought in along the way. But I think that I was a little bit more willing to do what he was saying because of the fact that I had spent years restricting calories and feeling miserable because of that and running every day, which I absolutely hated. And even though I had lost weight on the scale, like I mentioned earlier, I wasn't seeing the results that I wanted. So I think at that time, I was just so mentally exhausted from kind of running on a hamster wheel, feeling
Mhm.
like you're constantly doing everything that you're supposed to do, but not getting any of the results that you want to get. And so I think I was just so mentally exhausted that I was like, whatever this guy's telling me is different than what I am currently doing. And so I think it's that that got me bought in is what I'm doing currently isn't working. This is different. So I might as well try it because if I keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, then I'm going to be stuck forever. So I might as well just spend the first 3 months, see if there's any change, and then after that, just dedicate myself to it. So I think for most people, if you can get that through that first 3 months, then you'll probably be in a lot better of a mental space to be able to commit yourself to the process.
Yeah, and more invested in that process. Yeah, it's so interesting though the scale is just especially like for so many women it's funny because they could have be down several inches at their waist and have lost inches and they're like but the scale. I'm like it's just like that number is so it's like it's really not as important because like you said your experience was you did lose weight on the scale and you were like but my body composition hasn't changed, right?
Yeah,
At
the
one
ironic
point.
thing is that when I was losing weight, because I did lose weight through all that, when I was losing weight, I was not happy with my body composition. But through that entire year of doing it the right way, I didn't lose any weight. And by the end, I was very satisfied with my body composition. And it's wild
I
when
love
you
that.
make that connection and that realization. And for your listeners as well, just to give them some encouragement, the benefit of doing that as well is that the effects of it last far longer. Like here
Yeah.
I am 10 years later, I hardly focus on recomping my body like at all. I might go into a fat loss phase once every couple of years. I still eat ice cream, I still eat pizza, not every day, right? And that's the secret. But I
Yeah.
still basically eat what I want and nothing really changes for me, but it's because you have to do all that work up front.
Yep.
And just like the first 3 months is to convince you that this is the right path, that first year is to lock in those results and maybe even longer. It always depends, right?
Hmm.
In the coaching space, you always know who the better coaches are when they say it depends.
Yeah.
But it depends how long it takes you to lock in those results. It depends on where you're starting from. But for me, after being dedicated for an entire year, I pretty much was able to lock in those results. And I really don't think about it at all at this point.
So good. So good. And like for a lot of people, I know like it sometimes seems like a year feels like forever, but I'm like, it's really not. And if like, especially for how long you've been, I mean, like you had said all the way up sophomore year, you had that like, oh my gosh, mirror moment of, whoa, but you had tried a bunch of things. It's like, it's really not, it's really the shortcut. It might feel longer because you're like committing to this next year, but it's like, it's actually the shortcut in the end.
Yeah. The what I often say is the long way there is the shortest path there. Because if you think about it, if I had continued to restrict calories and run and still maybe lose weight but not be happy with my body composition, if I had continued on that path, how long would it have taken me to get where I wanted to be? And the answer is forever, because I would have never gotten there, because that's not the way to go about it.
Yep.
If your
Yep.
goal is to recomp your body. Now, if your goal is to run a marathon, then running probably will be the way, but also restricting calories won't be the way either. If your
Yep.
goal is to run a marathon, you still have to fuel for that outcome. And so it always depends on what outcome you're trying to achieve. But if I had continued down that path, it would have taken me forever. I literally would have never gotten there. But then you think about it might take me a year or 2 years, depending on where I'm starting from, to get to where I want to be. Well, if you compare that to never getting there, then it's the shortest path for sure.
Yep. Yes. Gosh, like if you can like set that bigger, like wider view of like, well, if you compare it to never getting there or taking the next decade, 2 or 3 years is nothing. You're good.
Oh, yeah. I was talking to somebody this past week and they were pretty hesitant with coaching. And I was like, well, how long have you been, trying what you're doing? They're like 25 years. I'm like, oh, my soul. Like, I
Yeah.
cannot imagine.
Oh,
Like,
my soul.
you're nervous to commit to something for a year or 2 years, but you've been doing something for 25 and not getting there. Like I can't imagine how frustrating that is. I
Mm,
was stuck
yep.
for about 4 or 5 years. I can't imagine 25.
Yeah. Yeah. Really. Oh my gosh. Well, one thing, so we have kind of those two-part topics I want to address with you, or have you, share your knowledge and wisdom on with our listeners. But one being a little more practical on the like creating an environment for fat loss. This is something just like to make. I love that you like simplify and make things easier because we're all about human nature making things easier, and that's how we're going to stick to it. So I want to talk about that. But first, can we talk about a little bit the grace and like perfectionism side of things? So actually, to give a little context, we were talking about Bryce and I, for you listeners, we were talking about doing a collab and doing this interview, and then Bryce shared with me that he's actually a pastor and he knows I'm faith based and whatnot too, and we were like, okay, let's do something in this line or in this vein, and we were like, what? Because like I really believe like the mental, emotional, spiritual, physical all go so hand in hand with each other. And if you're not healthy in one of those areas, it's going to affect the other areas. So I would love to talk about this topic with you. And first, kind of just want to set the tone by asking, like, how would you define in like the health and fitness space? How would you kind of define grace versus perfectionism?
Yeah, grace versus perfectionism in the fitness space. So, in the fitness context, what a lot of people end up doing to themselves, and typically it's type A personality type people.
Boop, boop.
So probably like you,
Yeah.
probably like me. And that type A personality is that I want to be in control of everything. And realizing along the way that being in control of everything is an illusion, that we cannot be in control of everything. So the way this kind of plays out is for me, the way it played out in the past, probably for you or something similar to this, is okay. it's Monday, right? Or it's the beginning of a new month, or it's the beginning of a new year. So I'm going to follow this such and such fitness influencer. I'm going to do exactly what they say. And so you do it for about 3 days because you're pumped and you're excited. But then you maybe didn't pack your lunch and you go out to fast food and you go, oh, I blew it for this week. So I'll start the next week. Right. And then the next week, well, the same thing happens. And the next week, the same thing happens. And until we realize that there are things in life that are out of our control, then we're always going to struggle with that. And so we have to take a step back and kind of what we were talking about earlier with the different methodologies of weight loss. If I were to run and restrict my calories forever, I would never get to where I wanted to be. Well, likewise, the same thing is true. If I were to start over every time I mess up, then I'd never get to where I'd want to be because I'm always going to mess up. And
Yep.
that's the reality. The reality is that we always mess up. And there's another component to that is how we define messing up, right? I had a
Mm-hmm.
client recently. Actually, this isn't recent because she overcame it recently, is where my mind is going. But about a month and a half ago, she was coming to our group coaching calls and she was saying, I'm really struggling with the fact that I like to eat sweets. And every night I'm struggling with, wanting to eat sweets, and that's been an issue for me. And I feel like I'm having to start over whenever that happens. And I was like, well, I mean, first of all, why do you feel that way? Why do you feel that you have to start over? She was like, well, because I messed up. I was like, well, first of all, that's not messing up. That's an
Yep.
opportunity to learn. Why am I eating what I'm eating? In combination with, was it worth it? Right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's worth it. And
Amen.
she had a time this past week where it was worth it. She had her
Yep.
son's birthday party. And I mean, of course, you're gonna have your son's birthday cake with him. Like, you're not gonna not do that. And so first we had to redefine for her, why do you feel like eating sweets is messing up? Because in context with your entire life, it might be, but it might not be. Because
Hmm.
the issue with sweets is not that you eat them, it's usually the amount that you eat them and the frequency in which you eat them. So we had to let her know about that and have her take a step back and say, okay, you're first of all not messing up, but even if you feel that you're messing up, you have to be able to kind of forgive yourself and just keep going with the plan. The fastest path to get to where you want to go is not how much you can be perfect, but whenever you're not perfect, it's how quickly you can learn and then just pick up the plan again. That's the fastest path to fat loss. It's not
Yeah.
about being perfect. It's about getting up and moving on faster. And the faster you can pick yourself up and move on each time you quote unquote mess up, the faster you're going to get to your end destination. Because what's keeping you from the end destination is not the fact that you mess up, it's the fact that you give up for 3 or 4 days every time you mess up. But if you
Yep.
quote unquote messed up and you just picked up your plan tomorrow, then the effects would be minimal or non existent. So, for
Yep.
example, that client that I alluded to, she celebrated her son's birthday party last week, had cake, ice cream, all the things. She still lost weight that week, and it's not because she ate ice cream that she lost weight. That really didn't have an impact because all the other days she was on point. And because she had one day that was off, it pretty much didn't have any impact on her at all. And so I think that in the fitness space, there's so much talk about like discipline, just do it. There's something wrong with you if you can't motivate yourself to do the thing. When in reality, it's not about any of that. It's about learning about yourself. When something goes off, why did that happen? And just being able to learn from it, maybe prevent it in the future, but just be able to move past it as quickly as possible. And the faster you can learn to quote unquote forgive yourself, and I say that in quotes because if you never did anything wrong, then you don't have to forgive yourself.
Yeah.
But if you feel like you need to forgive yourself, then the faster you can do that and the faster you can move past it, the faster you're going to get to the result that you want.
So good. So good. And I love what you said too. It's like realizing or asking yourself like why that happened. I feel like the more self-aware you become in that process, the more successful you will be and be able to move past it. Versus just like I suck, I have no willpower. It's like no, there was probably a reason.
Yeah.
Like a little bit more. And actually, one of my assistant coaches, she gave the analogy, which she might have heard it somewhere else. So credit to whoever gave this analogy originally. But like, as far as starting over every time, like as a car, like when your tire blows on the highway, it's like it'd be like going back home and being like, oh, I got to go back home to get it fixed, versus just like putting on the new tire and continuing on. It doesn't make any sense. Like you don't have to start over.
Yeah. No,
Like
you definitely don't.
just fix it. Yeah. And it's also, I love too that you said like the treat itself is not an issue or not bad, but it's also the your other food quality, quantity, all of that. Like talk about self-awareness. I'm like, as of recording this, like 18 weeks pregnant right now. And my husband was actually the one to point out, which he's a very brave man for doing this, but to point out that my macros have been a little off, I would say. And just as far as like replacing protein with a lot more cereal and ice cream and whipped cream. And so, but self-awareness wise, I was talking about, that, 20 80 20 rule, right? Like try to eat 80% whole foods, 10 to 20% fun foods, and I was like, if I'm being self-reflective and honest with myself, it's really been more like 35%, 40% fun food, and, the other whole food, nutrient dense foods. And I'm like, yeah, I could like blow that off on like, I'm pregnant, whatever. But I'm like, actually being self-aware of that. Because if you're doing those things consistently the majority of the time, over time, that's where like the issue is, not having one, you know, random treat or, your kid's birthday cake or whatnot.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah,
Yeah.
self-awareness. So good.
100%. Now, I do got to ask, not, I don't want to start interviewing you. I'm not trying to take control here, but what was the outcome for your husband? Like, did you come down on him? Like, I got to know because as a pastor, I am curious about those relational details. Like, kind of
Yeah,
what was the
which I
outcome
love.
of him
I,
pointing that out?
I love that about you, that the relational communication details. What's funny is he's made a couple other comments. Like I'm gonna get him in trouble saying this, but I actually posted on my story. He was like, "You posted that on your story?" I was like, "Yes, you make stupid comments. I'll post it on my story." He was like, "Oh, my little Violet." He was like, "But you look like you're starting to look like Violet from Willy Wonka." Because I was wearing a blue shirt and my belly's starting to get bigger. And I was like, don't, no, I cannot believe you just called. He was like, no, he like was saying it endearingly. And I was like, no, that one didn't hit. But anyway, yeah, it was funny because when he was like, you gotta get your protein up, girl. Like that's more so how he like went in. He was like, your macro's a little off. And I was like, excuse me. That was my first reaction. I was like, when you carry this baby, you can talk about my macros. But then I was like, the appreciative person in me and self-reflective person was like, I actually want to feel my best. And I do want to be aware of what I'm, you know, putting in, especially first trimester's over. I'm not like
Yeah.
just trying to eat whatever I can. It's like, without feeling nauseous or anything like that. So I was like, you know what? Actually, he's right, but I still get a free pass if I want it, but I don't necessarily want it. So, I was receptive to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty receptive.
So
Because
that's
also
good.
I knew
You were
his intent.
self-aware enough that
Yeah.
he could emerge out of that still alive. But
Yeah, emerge out of it still alive. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But also I would love to hear too, like in your experience, like talk about the grace side of things. I definitely gave my husband grace in that moment. But how does like practicing grace, because I think I'm a perfectionist, it sounds like you are too, naturally tend to lean that way. I know a lot of people listening to this are as well. But how like does practicing grace contribute more to like long-term success in fitness versus leaning more towards that perfectionist side of things?
yeah, I think it goes back to the idea that perfectionism is not possible.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest realizations of this is it was pretty close to within the first 5 years of my fitness journey. And I learned the fact that the FDA, they allow food companies to be 20% wrong on their nutrition labels. And when I learned that, I was like, man, I
Wow.
have been, I've been tracking my macros, I've been getting results, things are going well, but that's in spite of the fact that it's possible that these companies are giving me information that's 20% inaccurate. And
Yeah.
so that was a huge eye opener as far as the fact that you don't have to be perfect. Because even when you are perfect, you're not being perfect because of these other factors that are outside of your control. And
Mm,
unless you're a food scientist and are taking your food into a lab and you are overcoming the deficiencies of the food companies, which there are many, unless you're doing that, which none of us are, by the way. I don't do that. That's ridiculous. I have access to people that could do that for me, but it would be so overkill that forget about it. But when we realize that perfectionism is not only not ideal, but it's not even possible,
yeah.
then we're able to begin to let go of our perfectionistic tendencies. And, I say this ironically because there's lots of things in my life that I still have not learned to do this with.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm still learning to do this. Thankfully, I've learned how to do it with my food. But there's
Mhm.
other areas of my life where I'm not good at this. So for example, I'm really horrible. As an online fitness coach, I'm very dedicated to the podcast side of things. I'm very inconsistent with social media. Like I hardly do what I should be doing when it comes to social media. And here's why. Because I tend to give up whenever I be inconsistent. Whenever I start
Mm,
to be inconsistent with my social media, then I'm like, I should probably focus on all these other things. And the reality is that I would be much better off, when it comes to social media marketing and those kinds of things, if I were able to just go, you know what? Who cares if I missed a day? I'll just do it again tomorrow. But I don't do that. And I know what the solution is, but that doesn't mean that it's easy, right? And so that can be something else that your listeners can take away from this is just because it makes sense when you're listening to it right now, here's where the problem's going to happen. You're going to listen to
mm.
this episode, you're going to leave it, and then you're still going to be inconsistent. And then you're going to be like, man, I can't even be consistently inconsistent. And it's going to drive you crazy. And if you can first realize that it is hard, and that the second thing to realize would be, what, the path to grace is is not to lessen the fact that it's hard. Like don't say to yourself, well, this should be easy. That must mean that I'm a loser or something crazy like that.
Mhm.
This isn't easy. Therefore, what's one thing that I can do? What's the easiest thing that I can do to inch me in the right direction? Something that I
Mm,
implement, and probably you do something very similar with my clients, is that I have them track all their data, meaning what they eat, protein, calories, strength training, how often they do it, their progressive overload, all these things. Have them basically track everything. And whenever they come to me and are frustrated, I always pull out the data and I say, it doesn't matter that this meaningless thing feels off to you. Here's what matters. You got stronger this week. You lifted
mhm.
more weight than you did last week. Here's what matters. You were inconsistent with your steps last week, and this week you nailed them every single day. Or last week you hardly ate any protein, but this week you ate this much more protein on average than you did last week. And looking at it from the zoomed out holistic perspective of it's not about being perfect, it's about being a little bit less imperfect than you were last time.
Mm,
And
that's
when
a
we can do that, it becomes so much easier to give ourselves grace to say, you know what, this isn't that big a deal. I want to improve, and that's a good thing. But the way to improve is to just inch forward. And
yes.
we do that with everything. With everything else, we have that perspective. I think with food, it's hard
Mhm.
because we are taught that diet culture teaches us that if we're not perfect, there's something wrong with you. You're not motivated enough. You don't have enough willpower. I think that's why it's hard, but
Yeah.
that's just objectively not true.
That's the diet culture narrative right there, for sure.
Yep.
Like, yeah, you just need more willpower. That's it.
Yep.
No, and I like one thing I talk with on our team meetings and with my like Fit You coaches, and we talk about truth and grace, like delivering truth with grace, because that's where, and I like before we start recording, you mentioned you're a very data driven guy, very data.
Yep.
Show me the data, show me the numbers, which also makes sense for you with like pursuing podcasts versus social. It's like, okay, like they show me the data. But that's another thing, like you said, you could show a client the data of like, look how much you've progressed in hitting protein consistently, hitting your steps, hitting your workouts. The reverse is also true too. Not as fun to look at, but when I have like when I say like maybe there's a client who's just like feeling frustrated with a progress, and we pull up. I had one client actually recently who she had been with us like going on like 9 months, and we pulled up, how consistently had she checked in with done her check-in. So we have a weekly check-in, daily messenger access,
Yep.
her, workout targets, all the same things you just mentioned, right? And over that course of time, she was averaging 0 to 1 workouts a week, like zero, a lot of weeks zero. And then nutrition was way off, right? And then check-ins, I mean, she only filled out like a handful. And that's one of the biggest things for us. We're like, when you sign up for a coaching program, that's not the magic bullet. Like, you have to do the work. And she saw that when we just pulled up the data, like objectively, and she was like, whoa. She's like, wow. She's like, I haven't even gotten a like passing grade. If we were to grade me right now, like I literally wouldn't pass. And like based off the data, we were like,
Yep.
yeah, but that was, she was able to receive that and hear it because she was like, wow, like just kind of you held up the mirror for me a little bit. And so it's that like truth, you have to be honest with yourself in order to make progress, but also the grace that like if it was easy, everyone would be super jacked and fit and healthy and whatever. So do you have any advice for someone like how could someone find balance between pushing themselves? Like I definitely fall more on the side of pushing myself and perfectionist and being mad if I don't meet certain things, but between that balance of wanting to do better and pushing yourself versus showing yourself compassion and grace, because then people can fall on that side of things where they're like, it's okay, like I just love myself, like, and then but like finding that balance between pushing yourself and then showing compassion to yourself when you do have setbacks. Do you have any advice for the listeners?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to balancing those two things, because it's super important, you're going to get caught up either way. If you focus on either of the extremes, if you focus on being perfect and not giving yourself grace, you're going to get caught up because you're going to spin your wheels forever.
Yeah.
If on the other side, you never push yourself, then you're also going to get stuck and you're never going to progress and you're going to spin your wheels forever because you're not doing anything to elicit the change. So there's two types of people that usually will sign up for any coaching program. And one is, and I'm so glad that you mentioned those clients because I just had one person that was the mold. There have been a very low percentage of people that have come into my program, and probably the same is true for you as well, that have not seen results. And it goes back to this reason. It is because they actually didn't do anything.
Yeah.
I had one person who literally did not show up and they didn't last long. I actually reached out to them and I was like, this is not a good fit for you. So you probably shouldn't resign. They did not show up to their onboarding call. They did not show up to any of their group coaching calls. They did not show up to their one-on-one calls, like literally nothing. They did not watch any of the trainings. They did not do nothing. So the other side is also true that you have to be able to get yourself into action and not always saying to yourself, well, I'm being, giving myself grace. Because the two types of people are the people that beat themselves up and the people that never can get off the couch.
Hmm.
Those are the two extreme types of people. And both of those types of people are the kind of people that will usually sign up for a program. Because people in the middle usually have already figured it out, right? And they're
Yeah.
in the
Mhm.
middle where we should be, and they've probably already worked with a coach in the past, and that's why they're in the middle. So for somebody that needs to push themselves, what I recommend is okay, here's the big movers, your steps, your protein, strength training, because a lot of people that I work with work from home and so they sit a lot. So steps is really important because if you're getting like 2,000 steps a day, like I have this rule that unless you're getting your step count, we're not even going to think about reducing calories because that's not the next lever to pull. But if
Mhm.
you're getting your steps, you're getting your water, you're getting your protein, your overall calories are reasonable, all those things. What I recommend is when looking at all those metrics, take a look at, okay, what are the next two, maybe three things that I need to focus on? And just focus on that 1 to 3 things that you can change in the next week or the next month. So
Mhm.
instead of thinking, okay, I need to get my steps, my hydration, my protein, my calories, my workouts, I mean, right there, somebody listening is overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Instead of thinking it in that perspective, think about it from the perspective, okay, out of all those things, which of those things is holding me back the most? And then don't worry about improving all the other things. Worry about improving that one thing and make that thing your non negotiable thing. This week, I'm going to, no matter what comes my way, I'm going to get my protein numbers every single day. And if all the other things don't improve, it doesn't matter if you improved your protein intake. Now, of course, you don't want the other things to slide backwards, but you're
Yeah.
also not focused on improving them. And then you work on that protein intake until it begins to feel natural. Once that feels natural and good, then maybe you choose something else. Then maybe you look at your data and you're like, man, I'm only getting 5,000 steps a day, which is pretty low. So now that I'm getting my protein, I'm doing my strength training consistently, my my strength is building, those two things are in check because I think that those things are pretty important as the first
Mhm.
things. Then you go, okay, now what can I do to increase my steps from 5,000 to 6,000? And when you break it down, the problem is not that people don't know what to do. The problem is that people don't know how to break it down into bite-sized chunks enough that
Yeah.
they're able to move forward. And so instead of saying, well, I don't have time to do everything or improve everything, taking the step back and saying, okay, I don't need to improve everything all at once. What are the most important things to improve right now that will get me to the next level? And then once I get there, then I can choose to focus on something else.
So good. So good. Bite-sized chunks. And I think that's a lot of times why people, I think it's two parts why people sign up for coaching is, and why I've hired coaches myself in the
Yep.
past is the accountability. And then also because there is so much information and so many things I could be doing, I'm like, I need someone to tell me the biggest rocks, like what to tackle. Because, it's just like, okay, what's going to be the biggest needle movers for me? Because otherwise it's just like
Yep.
analysis paralysis
Yep.
and overwhelm, which this leads us actually and segues perfectly into our a little more practical tips, which I feel like you've already given so many practical tips. Um, but like, what are some of the like most common, and that I thought of when you were talking about protein and just increasing your protein goal and doing that no matter what. But in general, like, what are some of the most common like environmental barriers that would make fat loss harder? Because that's one thing, I think we can make it a lot easier if we like control our environment. So like what do you see are some of the most common pitfalls or barriers for people?
Yeah. And I'm glad that you asked this actually, because it's super fresh in my mind. I actually released a podcast episode this morning that is exactly on that topic.
Well, there we
And
go.
so we can just rehash them here. They're already top
Yeah.
of mind. When it comes to our environment, I think that there's three main things. Because again, we don't want bite-sized chunks. There's lots of things you could talk about.
Yeah.
But what are the three main things that most people struggle with? And I think the first one is their food environment. I think that if you're going to the grocery store, what you eat throughout the week starts there. And so if you are spending your grocery budget on nutrient poor foods, then guess what? The rest of your week, you're not set up for success and you're going to be eating nutrient poor foods.
Yep.
So beginning to make that shift, not at the dinner table, right? Not when you open up the fridge and wonder to yourself, what am I going to eat in the next 5 minutes? But altering your environment, starting with the grocery list. Okay, are these things minimally processed? Meaning that they're going to contribute the most to satiety as well as to meeting my micronutrient needs? Are these things minimally processed? Are they things that will help me to hit my protein fiber goals? Are they things that will contribute to my overall success? So if you find yourself going to the grocery store and just kind of randomly grabbing things out of habit, then that's the first environmental thing that needs to be changed. I gave
Hmm.
the example on that podcast episode I referenced that if you go to the grocery store and you end up buying Oreos and chips, then guess what you're going to eat throughout the week? You're going to eat Oreos and chips. And
I
that's
could
going to
speak
feel
directly
sick.
to that. We got
Yeah.
a gallon or a, I don't know what size gallon, something of ice cream at the store over the weekend. Normally I'll eat ice cream out person because I can't control myself in the house person. Like we don't keep it in the house. Like we'll just
Oh,
get ice
yeah.
cream while we're
Ice
out.
cream's the thing.
Ice
Yep.
cream's the thing. But guess what's been in the house? And guess what? Somehow I just keep eating all week. I'm like, ah, man, that's why.
Yeah, because you have it. And I have
Yeah.
definitely been there. If there's ice cream in the house, I'm going to eat it. My two things are ice cream and pizza. If I buy those, I'm eating them.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
Now, I live in North Carolina, so it's not as big of a problem for me because I grew up in New Jersey.
Oh
And
yeah.
so this is going off on a rabbit trail a little bit.
Yeah.
But New Jersey is like sandwich and pizza heaven.
Pizza.
Like
Mm,
you will get the
mm,
best sandwiches, the best pizza there. You cannot get it anywhere else in the entire world.
mm.
Maybe New York and maybe Philadelphia area, but other than that, you're not going to find it.
Ah, so
So it's a
good.
little bit easier for me. So that's the cheat code.
Yeah.
If you have local cuisine that you really love, move away. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But but
Exactly.
that is an environmental factor that I have a
Yeah.
leg up on, but you don't really have as much control over that. But so setting up your kitchen for success, I think another thing is setting up your intentions for your space. So for example,
Mm,
I have a home gym. So before I go to bed at night, I'm moving around my environment in order to accommodate for the fact that I want to work out in that room the next day. So
mm,
the area where my home gym is also it's like our entertainment room. It's like our multi-purpose room. So I kind of have to move around my couch if I plan on deadlifting the next day. So if I don't do that the night before, the chances of me doing that early in the morning when I wake up and it's time for my workout are very low.
yeah.
So for me, thinking about, okay, what is my workout tomorrow? And what do I need to move around in order to make doing it as easy as possible tomorrow morning? And if you have a gym membership, it would be packing your gym bag the night before so that when it's time to go to the gym, it's just a grab and go proposition and you're not, pre-coffee in the morning, right? You're not thinking
Hmm.
to yourself, what do I need to pack? And, forgetting things, then getting to the gym and, maybe you forgot, because I've done this, by the way, maybe you forget your shoes. Um, so what happened to me once is that I went to the gym before work, and I used to also be a school teacher. This was like 12 years ago. And I used to be a school teacher, so I had to wear like casual shoes, not sneakers, not gym shoes. And so I grabbed those and put them on in the morning because it was like 5 in the morning. Got to the gym and I was like, I can't work out in my dress shoes.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things, right? Making sure
Yeah.
that your environment is set up for success. And then I think that another thing that's super important, and this is the last one that I'll mention for now, because I want to keep it to three, is making sure that you have supportive people around you.
I was gonna ask you about that.
I think that that is key because if everywhere you go, right, the only thing you hear is, oh, so and so, for me, I'll just use myself as an example. Bryce can't eat this. Bryce can't do this activity because he's now into health and fitness. Ha ha ha.
Mhm.
And just kind of that kind of thing. It's going to be really hard to stick with it because you're going to be like, man, I feel like there's some kind of emotional distance between me and the people that I'm hanging out with. Now,
Yeah.
you'll also hear, fitness influencers, people online say things like, well, leave behind all the people that don't help you achieve your goals. And I'm like, well,
Can't have my husband, can't have my kid, can't have my
yeah, in some situations, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Like, never hang out with your siblings again? Like,
Yeah.
that's not going to happen. Or, like, am I going to ignore, like, hanging out with my brother-in-law? Because the majority of my wife's family is like, oh, yeah, I understand what Bryce does, and that just makes sense. My brother-in-law will be like, oh, Bryce can't have this, ha ha ha. And then he'll
Yep.
put it in front of me and whatever. Now, at this point in my life, I don't care because I know what I want, right? I want to
Yeah.
feel good. And if
Yeah.
that thing is not going to help me to feel good, then I don't really care. So it's not really, I don't think, about getting rid of the people, right? Because I don't think you're
Yeah.
going to get rid of people or that you should get rid of people. I think it's more about making sure that you do have access to supportive people. If the
Hmm.
people that are already in your life are not supportive of what you're doing, then that's okay. You just don't think about it, don't worry about it, but then find people that are supportive. You know,
Yeah.
join a Facebook group. Make sure that you're part of a coaching community. Make sure that you're part of things where people are going to be supportive of you and that push you towards your goals, and that you don't always feel like you're fighting your social circle in order to achieve what you want.
That's so true. I love too, like that's where your communication side comes out here, Bryce. Because you said like, really for so many people can create that relational distance or they feel
Yeah.
when they start their fitness or health journey and it can just create this gap or I don't know, awkwardness or divide. And I feel like it does get easier, like you said, like you're like, my brother-in-law doesn't even bother me anymore. Like
Yeah.
it's almost like a fitness maturity. And
Yeah.
once you kind of hit that point where like you could say whatever you want. Like I know how to enjoy fun food. I know how to eat healthy food. Like it doesn't matter what I want to feel good. But especially early on in
Yep.
someone's journey, like having whether, if you're still keeping the people who aren't a helpful influence, but having the positive influence from people is like crucial
Yeah.
during that time. Well, and one last question for you too is like if someone is feeling stuck in their fat loss journey, like despite making changes, because that's where, again, truth and grace, we have to be honest with ourselves. How much change are we really making or not? But like, say they're making changes and they're just feeling stuck. Like, what would be like one of the first areas of their environment, like that you would suggest they evaluate, or maybe their habits? Like, what would be something you would have them like look at or look into deeper?
That is a tough one. And that, first of all, that's a great question. I think it's tough because everyone is struggles with something very specific, I think.
Yeah.
Most people struggle with something that is unique, not unique, because our struggles are often shared by other people. We just don't know it. And so it feels to
Yeah.
us like it's unique. So I guess I could put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's different for everybody, but it's not unique in that there are other people that struggle with the same thing as you. So first, recognizing that, okay, you're not alone and that there are other people that struggle as well. If I were to like have a gun to my head and it was to be like, okay, what are the things that are most common, I guess, that people struggle with? I think it would be that I think that most people really focus on losing the weight as fast as possible, and they're not paying any attention to what their strength and overall well-being is telling them.
Mm.
So I think that most people do what I used to do what I told you guys about at the beginning of this episode, which is restrict calories and try to work out like crazy and punish yourself. And maybe you can punish yourself into a body that you'll enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, I think that it's more about how can you increase your performance as soon as possible because your body composition will follow your performance. And so, with that being said, I think protein intake and strength training are the two number one things that if somebody's struggling, I would just ask them to consider. Have you ever had a time in your life where you were really focused on packing on as much muscle as possible while keeping your protein intake up. Because if you've never done that, then that's probably the obstacle. And I think that a lot of times people that are struggling and they feel like they're doing all these things, when I ask that question, have you ever had an intentional time where you ate enough calories to support muscle growth, not weight gain, right? We're not looking to, well, I should say fat gain. We're not trying to
Yeah.
gain fat. We're just trying to increase performance. Have you ever had a time where you're focused on that? 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. And so I
Yeah.
think that that would probably be the first area that I would say take a look at that and determine whether or not you've had a time in your life where you've been focused on that. And that's probably the issue if the answer is no.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. Because everyone's mostly typically focused on fat loss.
Yep.
So the people, listening to this who are, I would say probably 9 out of 10 as well are like, yeah, no, I haven't, really just focused on, or if they have focused on building muscle, it's like, well, but really fat loss.
Yeah.
It's still like, yeah. But like
But
you're
you
a
were
case.
still eating in a deficit while you were strength training. That's not focusing on muscle gain.
Yeah, well, and you're a case in point of like prime example of someone who really focused on performance, strength, those things, and then the body recomposition happened the next, within that year, which is
Yep.
awesome. So good. Was there anything else that we didn't cover you want to share? Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on your show as a podcaster as well. I know how valuable having somebody on your show is and how much trust that you have placed in me to be able to communicate some things to your audience. So, first of all, that is not lost on me. So, the first thing I would like to say is just thank you to you for giving
Absolutely.
me that opportunity. Um,
Yes.
I think
And
that
I just have to say, I love these conversations. Like, these are some of my favorite interviews where it's a conversation. It's not an interview. So thank
Yeah,
you.
100%. And
Yeah.
that's the way I view it as well, which, by the way, I'm having Megan on my show here soon as well.
Whoop, whoop.
So just a little
Which,
plug for her as well.
well, I was going to say, speaking of, please tell us where everyone can find you and what your
Yeah, the
podcast
number
name
one
is.
place where I hang out is my podcast. And then people can contact me, via email or via social media. But the place that I'm most active is my podcast. And you can easily find that just by going to hamiltonfit.com/podcast. And then that will just take you directly to the podcast in the Apple player. You can also just search for it, Fat Loss Simplified, on Spotify or any other platforms that you listen. But if you type in hamiltonfit.com/podcast, it'll take you directly to the podcast.
Nice.
And then you can catch Megan's interview as well.
Awesome. And go back and listen to, you said you just released it today or just recorded it today, the
I just
episode.
released today, I think I titled it Why Motivation is Not Going to Get You to Your Fat Loss Goals, but What Does. And that's
There you
talking
go.
about altering your structure. So setting up a structure that is suitable for fat loss, as well as an environment that's suitable for fat loss. That's the one that dropped today.
So good. So go give that a listen. I will also put that in the show notes, the links and whatnot, so you guys can easily find that. But Bryce, appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time and look forward to chatting more on Friday.
Hey, awesome. Thank you again, and glad to be here.
Absolutely.